Morning of September 12th, 2025, Calvin Castine at Culver Hill in Beekmantown off Route 22. We're here just about every year. I think we skipped one year because of circumstances that prevented us from being here. As I was driving here, there was somebody that was standing in the middle of the road, looked like they needed some help, so we stopped and took care of that situation and didn't end up covering this event. But for the most part, we've covered every one of these that they've had since they started having them probably somewhere around 2 decades ago. I'm sure Gary Van Coor will fill us in on how many of these they've had. It's a bright, beautiful day, mid-60s, a great day in the North Country. No breeze, although we're hoping for rain. We didn't want it right now. And tomorrow will be the Battle of Plattsburgh Parade, so we don't want it then either. But outside of that, go ahead and rain. So we're going to point the camera and find out what's happening at this year's event. Always a very historic event. Gary does a great job here as Town of Beekmantown historian. This is a great location if you're traveling on Route 22 from between Beekmantown and Plattsburgh. Feel free to pull over and look around and investigate this marker. Gary will tell you that that marker behind that young reporter was buried by the roadside. In fact, when we started covering these many years ago, we'd walk from the nearby farmhouse up to the side of the road up there. And then when the state redid the Route 22, they worked with the Town of Beekmantown to put in this beautiful little park here. So with all that said, we're going to stop talking and wait till this program begins.
What a beautiful day. No rain. I understand that Mark Henry ordered this weather because the last time it rained he wouldn't come. He said, I'm going to melt.
Didn't happen.
We have an unusual configuration here of where to stand or where to sit. If you see a free chair, grab it or not. Lean up against a car. Just don't tell anybody. The town is not responsible for any remarks. I'm Gary Van Coor, town historian. Done this for a few years. And every year we try to do something a little bit different. And after a while we start recycling. But one of the things that we never change is a formal welcome. And that is by Sam Dyer, who pulled himself away from his tomatoes and is here to say hello.
Thank you, Gary, and thank everybody for showing up. My hat's off to Gary. He did something that usually doesn't happen. There's a legislative tour going on right now, and 3 of the legislators from the county are here, which I think Gary needs a big round of applause for. And both the Beekmantown legislators with Mark Henry and Dave Bazzaio, myself as supervisor, and my deputy Cheryl Turner are here. But this isn't about us. This is about you and what's happened here in the past. I'm looking at our custodian Rich Boar. Look at the grounds here. We've done something very special. I mentioned 4 or 5 years ago that this came with the state of New York working on this road. Gary used to bring us up the side of the road, and we didn't even have a state trooper out there to protect us. And the monument that's here, you couldn't very well see because it was buried on the stone wall and brush. But fast forward 20 plus years, I tell everybody this is the best day to be the supervisor because we're actually looking at something that's positive. People are out, the weather's okay, it should rain, I would appreciate that, but we'll deal with what we have. But I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming, and this is the kickoff. There's a lot of things going on all over the town and the city this weekend, but I think we've got a special applause for Gary because he does a super job. He's got, I call it his people, and they know who they are. I'm looking at one of them right now. That and the Lions Club and everybody else that's helped with this. Just thank you and thank everybody.
All right, the first official thing we're going to do after Sam's comments is raise the flag. And we have 2 people and a couple of scouts that have done this many, many times. They're down here with the reenactors. And as they raise the flag, I'll just briefly say that this is the Stars and the Stripes, 15 stars and 15 stripes, which was the flag of 1814. And it became famous because about 3 days after the Battle of Plattsburgh, that's the 11th, the British, who didn't know about what was going on up north, it was very difficult to communicate. And what they did is they were attacking, first of all, Washington, D.C., burned the presidential residence. And then they went on to Baltimore, and at Baltimore they bombarded the fort that was there called Fort McHenry. And this was the Stars and Stripes that flew over Fort McHenry that Francis Scott Key saw and wrote the lyrics to what became our national anthem. We'll now have one of the scouts from Troop 46 in Beekmantown give a pledge of allegiance.
Scout salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2.
Thank you. We'll now have the bagpipes. Thank you. That's Jerry Tatro, and Jerry has been doing this since it started, and that was over 20 years ago. And that's the kind of dedication. We have several people here that have helped with the parking, helped with the setup, done this for almost 20 years. And you can't do this sort of thing without that help. And part of this is also to have people come and talk, because if I had to talk for a half an hour, notice I'm limiting myself. If I had to talk for half an hour, you'd be all asleep in your morning naps. So we have a variety of people that do this. And the first person is he represents part of the Beekmantown district in the county legislature, but he happens to also be the chair. And the first year, he was very, very quiet and withdrawn, but we brought him out of his shell. I introduced Mark Henry.
Why do I come here every year? Why? I mean, it's always the same. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I always love coming to this event. As my colleague Dave Bazzaio and Calvin Castine will tell you that these are some of the nice things that you get to do as a legislator, and that's come out and come to great events like this. I want to thank Gary for the invitation again. I've been here every year, I think, except once when I got called away. I've always looked forward to it. And I want to thank the Scouts and Mark Sand for being here, as well as our honor guard that stands over there the whole day. We're certainly glad to see all of them. I know you'll be pleased to hear that I will keep my remarks brief. And I would like to lightly touch upon what I think are some broad themes that bring us all here today. I know that Gary and others, especially Gary, will expand upon these themes very shortly. We gather here today at Culver Hill, a place made sacred by the courage of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. On September 6, 1814, as the British Army advanced towards Plattsburgh, this quiet countryside became a battlefield, and the people of Beekmantown rose to meet that moment. We are here to reflect and to remember that event. Remembering history connects us to the struggles and the achievements that shaped us. It teaches lessons, honors, sacrifice, and preserves values for future generations. Forgetting history risks repeating mistakes, while remembrance provides wisdom, gratitude, and strength. By reflecting on the past, we find meaning in the present and perhaps direction for the future. I've been here often, and each time I think upon what the main lessons of Culver Hill might be. I believe there are four main themes that we might consider. First, many of the folks that were here were ordinary citizens. They were not professional soldiers. They were farmers, fathers, and young men who laid down plows and tools, took up muskets, and stood in defense of their homes. Their courage came not from training, but from love of family, community, and country. The Revolutionary War had been a fight for independence. Then, they were colonists. Most were citizens of Britain. But in the War of 1812, we stood as Americans. We were defending not only our homes, but also our rightful place among the nations of the world. The second theme is the sacrifice of families. This stand was costly. Families here lost fathers, sons, and brothers. Their sacrifice reminds us that liberty is never free. It is secured not only on distant battlefields, but also in small towns, where neighbors choose duty over safety, and where love of community is stronger than fear. Thirdly, the battle was of strategic importance. Their bravery slowed one of the most powerful armies of its time. The delay gave American forces a chance to prepare at Plattsburgh, where victory soon after secured peace and safeguarded our young republic. And finally, as we show here today, it left a lasting legacy. The story of Culver Hill is more than history. It is a living testament to unity, resilience, and the enduring spirit of our people. And it reminds us, too, of the power of reconciliation Those who were once our adversaries are today our closest allies. Americans and Britons now stand shoulder to shoulder in defense of liberty around the globe. Today, we carry forward the spirit of Culver Hill. May we continue to honor the courage, the sacrifice, and the unity of those who came before us. May we learn and remember that lesson of history, and may we always remain worthy of the legacy entrusted to us by our country and forged on this hill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Very well said. Tough act to follow, that guy. The next one will be the other county legislator that serves part of the town of Beekmantown. And he left his tour that he's supposed to be doing to come here, and then he's going to scoot back to that tour as part of his committee for the county. And Mark, you're just playing hooky, right?
I am, yes. I use this as an excuse to get out of here.
He's not even making an attempt. He just, you know, when you get to be county chair, you can do that. So, without further ado, David Bazile.
Thank you, Gary. So, since Mark wrote that long 9-page speech, mine can be really short. What an awesome park here. I mean, folks, it goes to the resolve and the spirit of our early military, and how they, like Mark said, gave up a lot to battle for freedom and for the right to own property and not to be taxed, and that the Army was from old elderly men to like 16-year-old boys who were battling for America. I must say, this is a great tribute to that spirit, and I love the park. I actually mentioned to Mark when I came in here, I'm like, I'm just looking around, this has got to be the nicest park in Clinton County. There's not a weed in the tarmac. It's just been cared for with the utmost care, and I'm very proud to be part of Beekmantown and be part of this ceremony. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Another 10 or 15 times and you'll be really easy to do this. The next person who has been, I think, to every single Culver Hill ceremony since its inception, and I'm going to reflect on that later on, for recording it, and it's providing a record of what happened, not just about the history, but of the history that we are making by doing this after almost 20 years. I think it's 22 years, not sure. But Calvin Castine is from District 1, which is along the border. And it just shows you how we welcome people from far away. But I've often said the army that was headed towards Plattsburgh wasn't airlifted in. They marched, which means they came from Canada, and they marched through Champlain first, and then Chazy, and then Beekmantown, but was still part of the town of Plattsburgh at that time, into what was the village of Plattsburgh, and that's where they settled in. But they came through Champlain, and Champlain has quite a history there too, because when they got finished, they had to march back, and they didn't all go home quickly. They hung around for a while. So Calvin, would you please come and say a few words?
I think you've already said most of them, Gary. Thank you. And Dave, AI wrote that thing that Mark read, believe me. His speeches have gotten a lot better in the last month or so, believe me. Clinton County was formed on March 7th, 1788. It included the towns of Champlain, Plattsburgh, Willsboro, and Crown Point. which eventually became, that footprint became 3 counties, Clinton, Essex, and Franklin County. The event that took place here happened in 1814, 26 years after 1788. Yesterday, many of us remembered the attacks that took place on September 11th, 2001, 24 years ago. So 24 years ago, 26 years ago. This gives you a time reference to how young our county was back in 1814. And as Gary just said, in fact, that the Battle of Culver Hill that took place right here did not happen in the town of Beekmantown. It happened in the town of Plattsburgh. Beekmantown became a town 6 years later in 1820. Our county was still in its infancy in 1814. Champlain and Moores had come off of Champlain in 1804. Peru had come off of Plattsburgh and Willsboro way back in 1792. But all of the rest of our present-day towns were yet to be incorporated. The entire eastern portion of our developing county took place in this 1814 invasion. According to Champlain founder Pliny Moore's journal, the first scouts showed up on August 28th in Champlain. Soon after, the troops started to arrive and camped in and around the present-day location of Northeastern Clinton Central School, onto Bob Venn Park across the road and into the village of Champlain. H.K. Averill said that the invading force eventually stood at 14,000 men. They soon started marching south through Chazy around September 5th, and then here to Beekmantown in September 6th, where they met some resistance. As you can imagine, whether it was 5 or 10,000 troops, it wasn't Route 22 at the time. It was probably not much more than a snowmobile trail through here. So you can imagine pulling their cannon, trying to get that many troops through. How do you feed these people? How do they fill their canteens? It was really a tough effort for the people invading here. And locally, the volunteers came from the Peru area, which at that time was the entire southern portion of our county. Many of the volunteers came from there. And as Sam Dyer will attest to, right now it's harvest time. So the local volunteers who left their farms and families to come here and fight were giving up something. A very important time of the year for them. You work all year to get that harvest in, and if you don't get it in, it's going to be a long winter. So every town was involved, and in the meantime, the British fleet crossed the county into the U.S. at Rouse's Point, sailed past Chazy and the future Beekmantown shores to meet their enemy at Cumberland Head. With the fleet defeated, the ground forces retreated. You can see the hardships that the ground forces would have been putting up with their supply chain from the lake having been defeated. So they made that, I think, wise decision to head back. They brought their wounded back to Champlain at Dewey Tavern and finally left there on September 25th, 4 weeks after their arrival. I'm certain that resistance that they faced here at Culver Hill and then Halsey's Corners and then within the present-day boundaries of Plattsburgh helped them make a decision to retreat when their navy was defeated at that Battle of Plattsburgh. So it's just difficult for us to sit here and look back and imagine what it really looked like back here back then, because we can't imagine that. It's just, like I said, maybe just like a snowmobile trail to pass through here. So, and we all know that if we don't mow our lawn every week when the rain's outside, it starts to grow. So these roads, these highways, these paths have to be maintained. So it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of effort for the British to invade, and I'm glad they made that decision to head home. Thank you.
Some of the volunteers here are retired teachers, and they're going to hand out a quiz at the end of this ceremony to see exactly how much of this you took in. And you haven't even heard me talk yet. Unfortunately, the British representative, Commander Alastair Morris, is not able to come to the weekend due to illness. We wish him or his family well, but we usually have the British representation. For years and years it was Joe and Roy Carter, whose ancestor was Willington, who died here. He was Lieutenant Colonel Willington. We also have other members of the families that were here. And if you look at the back of your program, and I know I do this every year, but it takes time to print these up. We have a list of the families, some of the families that were here at the time or fought in the War of 1812, 1814. Some of the families were just farmed, and they were kids when they marched by, 7 years old. Can you imagine the impact that that would have on a 7-year-old kid, seeing this army and then having a battle across the way from your house? I mean, it had to impact them. So we have, at various times, different people have come. Some of the folks here, I mentioned the Carters. They first came in 2002, and they stopped coming when the pandemic hit. And now, with the age and difficulty flying and all that, they can't make it anymore. But they always think of us, and they always please say hello from Marlborough, England. And we say, yes, we will, and we take pictures, and we always send it to them. We also have the Dominy family. There's quite a few members here. Esther and Martha and Carol are here. In the past, we've had the Patridges show up, and Ron Wood was related to the Staffords, and you'll hear that name soon. We have guests here that I don't know if you've ever been here before, because they usually kept you so busy. But we have descendants of Thomas McDonough here today. We have Jim McDonough and his daughter Margaret Timms. And so welcome, Jim and Margaret.
Thank you, Gary.
And before I go on, I definitely want you to take a look at the people who are a part of this or who have been a part of this. And no one person or no small group does this without a whole lot of support and help. And some of the volunteers, as I've mentioned, have been doing this since the monument used to be on this other side of that wall, and it was a steep and kind of like escarpment there. You had to scamper to get up it. And we were standing in the road. We're glad to see state police here. Oftentimes we have the sheriff patrol. When we first started doing these, people were driving on the road. There was a line for the shoulder, and then that's where the escarpment started. So people were standing there. And if it wasn't for these officers coming with all the added traffic and such, I think we prevented a lot of accidents and harm. So thank you to the state police. Thank you to the sheriff department. Thank you to Mark Sand and the Boy Scouts, Troop 46. Both of my sons were in Troop 46 back in the day. We also have our reenactors, and a lot of times it depends on who's available, but they always show up. And they're over there, and they're PJ and Mark, all of those fellows over there have come year after year after year. Now, I have to say that this year, I understand that the people who have muskets that work aren't here. So this is kind of like what happened at Culver Hill. The people who barely had muskets were here. There was 250 regular soldiers here. But you never know. Militia didn't have a lot of gear, let's put it that way. But we'll go with it. They're here. They do their salutes. I try to vary what I say every year. And I've been told by many people that I should not talk so much. It's one way or the other. Either I talk too much or I don't say anything at all. And then they say, what's wrong with you? You're not saying anything. Sam says that to me quite often. What's wrong with you? You're not saying anything, but if I'm talking, he knows everything's fine. One of the people that we're missing this year, and he's in transition, is Billy Jones. Billy Jones has been so good to this community and supporting it in so many different ways, and he's always calm, he's always had words, and you can tell that we have a camaraderie here, that we pick on each other, which is good. And Billy Jones can be picked on, and he allowed that to happen, but he would pick also. And last year, Billy made a comment, something about I had to either make my comments shorter or he was going to have problems with his behind. They're steel folding chairs. Apparently he's a bony person. I don't know. So this year, you'll notice that we have, thanks to Rich Bois, who also is great help. He's maintenance for the town. He brought the chairs, and you notice they are padded. Padded chairs. And you see, Billy, what you're missing? Whenever you see him, tell him we're thinking of him. September 6, 1814, the Battle of Beekmantown at Culver Hill took place. The first encounter was just up the road about a mile, and that was the first bloody encounter. That's where people were shooting at each other, dying, getting wounded. The Americans had 500 militia. They saw this horrific line of red coats coming at them that stopped at nothing. And so most of them very wisely said, this is not a good thing to do. I have a family. I have to get out of here. I've got things to do. And they left quickly. But about 30 stayed behind, and they were very instrumental in what happened here. And they were also had been joined by 250 regulars under Major John Wool. We've talked about that before. There were casualties. There were pretty high casualties. I always like to make this Baltimore. You get to know about Baltimore because a song was written. You get to know about Paul Revere because a poem was written. You don't get to know about Culver Hill because anybody hasn't written a song or written a poem that's had a great following. But when I was in Baltimore a few years ago and went to Fort McHenry, it's a national park. I went to and talked to some of the rangers. I said, so how many died during this bombardment? It took place for a better part of a day as the naval vessels were firing upon the fort, big stone fort. He said, we can document 3 deaths. I said, oh, really? And I thought of this stone, and you say, how many people died at Culver Hill? We're not sure, but there were 3 officers that died here that are now buried in Riverside Cemetery. And there were others that were killed and a lot more wounded. So we had more casualties than Fort McHenry did. We got to no, I don't want it to be a national park. It's a good town park. And because people tend to forget, they really do, in the late 1800s, Dr. David Kellogg, he was a country doctor that would take his buggy out to people. It was a time where he realized how much history took place in this area, and he didn't want that to pass. And so he helped to start a thing called an organization called the Plattsburgh Institute. And their goal was to have people remember the history that happened less than 100 years before right here. And Culver Hill was one of those places. And because it's the first place there was a major bloody encounter, and again, it was not a township, but it was a community, was right here. And the reason they did this is because of the high point, and there were stone walls, and this is military, and so you have an advantage if you're behind a stone wall as opposed to marching in the open. Didn't make any difference to the British, they kept coming anyway. But their first project was to get a monument here at Culver Hill, and this is it. This is a piece of history. This was put in 1894. That's over 100 years ago. And it's still here. But it almost wasn't still here. Because as time went by, things changed. But most of you have no idea, and I'm going to bestow upon you this knowledge, that this monument was Vermont, from Barrie, Vermont. It's granite, and it weighs 3,000 pounds. Sam could pick it up, but I couldn't. It was purchased by E.L. Smith and Company. And it's the oldest monument of its kind in Clinton County. And we almost didn't have it. The following year, 1895, they put another one at Halsey's Corners down the road, and they have a ceremony starting at 1:30. Please go. It was dedicated, this was dedicated on September 22nd, 1894. And I want you to think about this. 600 people attended. 600. And this was the horse and buggy time. Carriages lined up all the way into the village. There were speakers from Vermont and from the United States, and they all made Mark's speech seem like a real fast thing. There was a booklet that was published by the Press Republican, or by the, I think it was the Press, or maybe the Republican then. But as we have descendants, they had descendants. The people who unveiled the monument back in 1894 were Helen Woodward and Julia Howe. Now, anybody from the town of Beekmantown, those names are familiar. Some of those families are still here. The people who got the site ready was Ira Rawlson, who lived just down the road, and Rufus Stafford, which was Ron Wood's ancestor. So those names are familiar. Some of the speeches that were given were very, very long, but also in attendance who did not speak was Henry Dominy. He was 87 years old. He was 7 years old when the British marched past their house, 87 for this. Solomon Barber, 87. James Corney, 87. And Amasa Pierce, 92 years old. These people lived a long time, considering everything that happened in their lives. It's quite amazing, I think. Now, according to Addie Shields, a former town historian, she was encyclopedic memory. You asked her a question, and she took you on a trip, answered the question eventually, asked her about the farmer, and she would not only tell you about the farmer, but how many chickens he had, what the lay of the land was, how many oxen they used to plow. Incredible, incredible person. And in 1930s, this little country road that used to go through here was widened and leveled off. If you look across, you'll see that this is the knoll goes right over there, but the road is down there. And it had a lot of stone walls, and a lot of those stone walls ended up right over there underneath the road. They used them as fill. You know, building materials, they were handy, they were right there. So in 1930s, that's when the escarpment was made, and this monument was moved back somewhat. But it was still very, very close to the road. If you go on the other side of that wall and look down, you're still far from the road from where it was. And that's the way it was. And as time went by, vegetation took over, more people forgot. And if it wasn't for Bill Crosby, who's here, who would mow a little swath up to it, it was totally shrouded in the brush. And so, knowing that at that time, that there were going to be a bicentennial commemoration coming up, we got together a group from the community. Sue Connick, who lives next door. Gladys Fortin, who lives right next door. Bill, who lived across the street. Addie, the town historian. Dennis Holber, who comes here every year and helps with the traffic control. He was the president of the Beekmantown Lions Club, and we talked about what can we do. And Gladys Fortin said, I want to donate my land, because she owned this land. The Fortin family owned this land. And she said, I'm going to give you an acre so you can make a park. Well, getting the land and then having a park are two different things. I'm losing my microphone, but that's okay. So if it wasn't for the generosity and the dedication of this committee of the community, this park wouldn't be here. But it also wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for the town board. Because we went to the town board, we certainly weren't going to make a park. We certainly weren't going to have the liabilities at a park and all that. But what was going to happen is, in 2007, is they were going to widen the highway. And that really lit the fire under us, because if they widened the highway, and really and truly this monument was in the state right away, somebody could just come and take it and they'd have 3,000 pounds of fill. And we didn't want that to happen. So in 2007, they had hearings, I guess you call it, anytime you're going to do this, to see what's going to be affected. And our committee went, and the town board was behind it, and the Lions Club was behind it, and we had a plan. And because we were catching them before they started the work, they became partners in getting this park. And so the Department of Transportation for New York State, they're the ones who actually came up with a couple of different designs. They're the ones who actually did the work. They're the ones who moved this monument. They're the ones who took the stone wall that was there and brought it over and piled it up, and thank goodness that Bill allowed them to pile the stones on his property across the road. And then when the road was done, they rebuilt, that's the original stone that was here on September 6, 1814. Different configuration, but it's the original stone. And they did all of this. It was crushed stone, and then the town later on brought in the pavement. I got to tell you, sometimes there's no weeds because the pavement is that thick in some places. And so over the course of the years, we've added on a flagpole that was donated, a historic marker that was a grant, and so on. And so this park was dedicated in September 10th of 2009, and the stone goes on to live and tell us the story. In 2013, we rededicated the stone. And here we are. I'm not good at math. Over 20 years later. Is it 20? No. 2013? Told you I wasn't good at math. 10, 11 years. Here we go.
12.
How big was that fish? Calvin said he got one that big. So we're so happy that you're here. We're so happy to keep the history alive. We're so happy that the Plattsburgh Institute did what they did. We're so happy that the town of Beekmantown has supported this, and the various supervisors and the town boards, they've changed over the years, but they've all been very, very supportive. We're so happy that you will play hooky and come and be a part of this. And as Dr. Kellogg said in 1894, many people were present and things passed off delightfully. Thank you. I was just checking with these guys to make sure that they were still feeling all their parts. The next part is probably the most somber after the raising of the flag, and that is to recognize those who were here and sacrificed. And we have a British wreath, which Joe and Roy Carter brought from England, probably 2003. And we have one for the Americans. And we're going to have Carol represent the Americans, and Mark, because the Brit can't be here, Mark will be the British. So if you would lay the wreaths, please. As Bill Long, and the last post was what they had before they did taps. So in 1814, that's what we would have heard. And now, Jerry. Thank you so much, and again, thank you for coming. Make sure you stop and see Halsey's Corners at 1:30 and enjoy the rest of the weekend. They got wonderful things going on all weekend. Thank you.
Okay, our coverage of the ceremony here at Culver Hill, something we've been doing for at least a couple of decades, and Gary always arranges a great service. Next year we're hoping with the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the U.S., we're hoping to have a ceremony in and around Bob Venn Park in Champlain, so near Dewey Tavern, which was such an integral part of this invasion back in September of 1814. Thanks for watching.